Welcome to this seminar on chiasms. This video has links to articles that go with it, which you can use as detailed notes. Hebrew is a language of prayer and study. A Hebrew chiasmus, or chiasm, is a type of literary device that is used to highlight a concept the author wants to emphasize. The noun chiasmus originates from Greek, which means to place crosswise in a diagonal arrangement. The X-shaped structure adds depth and meaning to the passage. The words, phrases, or concepts of each leg of the structure are in reverse order. The symmetrical concepts may be similar or contrast. Jonah 1:3 is an example of a chiasm found in a single verse. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Note that there is a pattern of repetitive words, and if you break up the passage into its component parts, the X structure of the chiasm emerges. Here I isolated just the words that formed a pattern, and you can see the chiasm more easily. The inflection point of the chiasm places an emphasis on Jonah's desire to avoid Nineveh and disobey God. Chiasms may be comprised of concepts instead of words and phrases. A rare example is seen in the author Daniel, who wrote his book in 2 different languages. The use of 2 languages was a common practice of ancient writers as a means to communicate to a wider audience. Aramaic, used in Daniel chapters 2 through 7, was intended for a wide Gentile audience, including the ruling class. Hebrew, used in Daniel's chapters 8 through 12, was intended for the nation of Israel. The chiasm design that Daniel employs is an ordered sequence of ideas that lead up to an apex, after which the ideas are presented in reverse order. Each chapter of the book is one concept, and the apex calls attention to God's message to that target audience. The Aramaic chapters of Daniel are 2 through 7. The prophecy of the 4 kingdoms, in Daniel 2, is about Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great metal statue. The trial of God's faithful, in Daniel 3, is about Daniel and his friends sent to the fiery furnace. The prophecy of the pagan king, in Daniel 4, is about Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great tree. The inflection point is Daniel 4:37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true, and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. The prophecy to the pagan king, in Daniel 5, is about the inscription on the wall of Belshazzar's palace. The trial of God's faithful, in Daniel 6, is about Daniel being sent to the lion's den. The prophecy of the 4 kingdoms, in Daniel 7, is about Daniel's dream of 4 beasts from the sea. The inflection point of this chiasm speaks to the audience of Gentiles and the ruling class. The God of the Hebrews is real and true. The Hebrew chapters in Daniel are 8 through 12. The conceptual chiasm is the prophetic details of the 2nd and 3rd kingdoms in Daniel 8, Daniel's prayers of deliverance of God's people in Daniel 9, verses 1 through 23, the arrival and purpose of the Messiah in Daniel 9, verses 24 and 25. The inflection point is Daniel 9:26. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. The death and return of the Messiah is in Daniel 9:26 and 27. Daniel's prayers and fasting of deliverance of God's people is in Daniel 10. The prophetic details of the 3rd and 4th kingdoms is in Daniel 11. The inflection point of this chiasm speaks to the nation of Israel. The Messiah will be sacrificed. Now, once a chiasm is identified, how do you analyze it? Is it simply finding the inflection point? No. You need to carefully observe the entire chiasm to understand the emphasis of the inflection point. Take, for example, John 1 through 18. With this introduction, the Apostle John presents a chiasm that succinctly teaches the preeminence and purpose of Jesus Christ. Known as the fourth gospel, the Gospel of John is believed to be the last gospel to be written and circulated. Defending the claims that Jesus was the Messiah, it was not intended to validate the witnesses, but rather to proclaim that salvation was truly available for those who placed their trust in him. Compared to the synoptic gospels, the Apostle John presents Jesus as Lord and writes a gospel that is more theological in content. From the very beginning, the book of John presents the divinity of the historical Jesus as the incarnation, God manifest in flesh. The words and deeds of Jesus Christ are the words and deeds of God, manifest in human form. The book of John uses the term believe more than any other New Testament book, which places an emphasis on the historical reality of Jesus Christ and the historical event of his crucifixion and resurrection. The chiasm can be seen here. Due to screen size, I can only show you half of the chiasm at a time. The verse numbers are indicated so that you can perhaps try to do this on your own. The first half of the chiasm is John 1, verses 1 through 11. The second half of the chiasm is John 1, verses 13 through 18. The inflection point is at verse 12. To enable careful observation of the entire chiasm, you can make a chart that correlates each verse with its inverted parallel. By evaluating these pairs, you can gain a better understanding of what the author intended through the pairing and their ultimate contribution to the inflection point. For example, examine the pairing of John 1, verses 1 and 2 with verse 18. Listen to how they read. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, who was in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. By making a chart of all the chiasms pairing, you can record your observations and thoughts alongside. When the chart is finished, you'll be able to stand back and read your observations and impressions in sequence to the inflection point and gain a better context of its emphasis. Breaking down a passage into component parts makes the observation process of Bible study so much easier. You can review and isolate items for further study, as well as pinpoint errors in your methodology. In this example, you can look into what light means. This figure of speech can be understood in the chiasms pairing of John 1, verses 3 and 5, with verses 16 and 17. Listen to how they read. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. For of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. With careful observation, you can see that light is in reference to the means of salvation and eternal life. The juxtaposition of darkness is the figurative representation of sin and depraved morality. You should always check your work elsewhere in the Bible For example, John 3:16, which would corroborate this observation. The inflection point of the Apostle John's chiasm is, "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name." If you take the time to integrate your understanding within the context of God's covenants, you may realize that the means for salvation under the new covenant is through faith in Jesus Christ. The means for salvation under the Mosaic or Old Covenant was through faith in God, not the law itself. This emphasizes Jesus' preeminence and purpose and completes the figurative picture of light. Through this discussion on chiasms, I hope you can see an example of the literary beauty of ancient Hebrew literature. Learning how to recognize and objectively study them will enhance your understanding of the biblical passage and ultimately have a meaningful impact on your life and others whom you may touch. But don't take my word on this. Take the time to look into this for yourself, and feel free to use my study as a starting point for your personal journey. The process of sanctification is just as meaningful as the discovery of the Bible's truth itself.